The evening air in Pearland felt unusually still as I pulled into the driveway, a sense of unease coiling in my stomach. The suburban streets, normally so familiar and comforting, seemed distant and unwelcoming tonight. I was running a few minutes late, but nothing could have prepared me for what awaited inside. The lights from the dining room spilled softly into the front yard, illuminating a polished wooden table set with pristine dishes. My mother, Corinne, had outdone herself with a meticulously arranged casserole, perfectly browned and glistening under the warm chandelier light. Father, Eldred, sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable, rigid as stone. My siblings, especially Lorna, gave subtle smirks that I couldn't quite place. I noticed immediately there was no seat reserved for me, my place setting absent, a subtle yet unmistakable message of exclusion. I swallowed hard, trying to convince myself I was reading too much into it. Everyone's smiles were thin, their politeness edged with an unfamiliar sharpness. As I stepped closer, a quiet tension pressed down on me, invisible yet suffocating. Attempting to maintain composure, I slid into the nearest empty chair at the side, offering a tentative greeting. Lorna's eyes gleamed with something unreadable, and she immediately began recounting my so-called past failures in a voice laced with mockery. "Remember when you completely forgot your summer internship project? Honestly, how could you mess up that badly?" she said, tilting her head as if to enjoy my discomfort. Corinne added her own weight, blaming me vaguely for old family conflicts, never specifying details, but enough to make my skin crawl. Eldred's voice cut in briefly. "Now's not the time." But his tone sided more with them than me. I tried to calm the rising storm within me, suggesting we talk later outside the heat of dinner. I kept my tone even, deliberate, hoping for a sliver of reason. But inside, confusion and disbelief mounted, each passive-aggressive jab slicing a little deeper. My mind raced. Am I imagining this? Are they really doing this to me? A glass of water wobbled in my hand, knocked slightly, spilling across the polished tablecloth. The small splash echoed loudly in my ears, a fragile break in the tension that seemed only to foreshadow the real rupture. Then Lorna's words hit me like a hammer. "You shouldn't even be here," she said, voice cold and final. I opened my mouth to protest, to ask what I had done, but Eldred's sudden, harsh voice cut through the air. "You're not welcome anymore." The room fell silent. Corinne avoided my gaze entirely. The words were clear, unyielding, and real. My heart sank, disbelief battling with a sharp, almost physical pain. I tried again. Why now? What did I do? No answer came. The practicality of their decision was cruel and methodical. "We've packed your things. You should go tonight." My suitcase sat by the porch, waiting. The front door, left ajar behind me, seemed to mock the emptiness that had replaced any warmth I once felt in this house. Shock and betrayal crashed over me, a tide of emotions I could neither stop nor fully comprehend. I felt abandoned, left to navigate the cold evening alone. Stepping out, the Texas night wrapped around me, humid and thick, pressing against my skin like reality itself. My thoughts churned through possibilities, friends, co-workers, shelters. Each option felt simultaneously hopeful and inadequate. I did not cry. Instead, a quiet, firm resolve began to form, small but persistent, anchoring me to a sense of agency. Yet my eyes were drawn immediately to a black SUV parked a few feet down the curb. Its dark windows reflected the dim streetlights, and though no one moved inside, the vehicle's presence sent a shiver down my spine. I sensed eyes watching, a subtle reminder that the world beyond these walls was unpredictable, and perhaps my past was poised to reappear at any moment. I paused, suitcase in hand, and for the first time that evening let myself breathe, surveying the street as if the next move depended on my clarity and courage. The night had just begun, and everything I knew about my family and myself was about to be challenged. The SUV had vanished by morning, leaving only a hollow ache behind as I shifted uncomfortably in the passenger seat. I had claimed as a makeshift bed behind the grocery store. The heat pressed against the car, mingling with the ache in my back and the stiffness that came from sleeping on leather seats. I rubbed at my eyes, the faint smell of yesterday's dinner still clinging to my clothes, and realized I hadn't eaten anything since the cold dismissal at home. Reaching into my suitcase, I pulled out a clean shirt and quietly changed in the public restroom, trying to preserve the last shreds of dignity. I brushed my teeth at the sink, the tap water sounding like the only normal thing in an otherwise fractured morning. Calls to old friends went unanswered, their voicemail greetings a stark reminder that I had slipped from their daily concern. Even my cousin Tina, usually a reliable anchor, brushed me off with a hurried, "I'm swamped, sorry," leaving me more acutely aware of how quickly a person disappears when they are no longer convenient. By the second day, my stomach ached from a breakfast skipped, and I tried my luck at a local diner. The manager's eyes lingered too long on my suitcase at my feet, a silent judgment that stung far worse than words could. Inside a nearby cafe, a cluster of women whispered, glances sharp, laughter just audible, their words cutting without effort. I kept my composure, sipping coffee and nodding politely, but each chuckle and sideways glance felt like a confirmation that invisibility had become my new reality. That night, I found myself at a 24-hour laundromat, the hum of machines and flickering fluorescent lights offering a strange solace. A janitor noticed my unease and slid a warm soda across the folding table. Small gestures like these were brief sparks, fragile reminders that not all human connections were lost. I opened my notebook and began writing down everything I refused to forget. Snippets from the dinner, the tone in my father's voice, the casual cruelty in Lorna's smile. People truly do look through you when you have nowhere to go, I thought, like you're already a ghost walking among the living. On the third day, I returned to the public library, seeking more than just warmth and a place to rest. The free Wi-Fi allowed me to research legal resources and tenant rights, a small attempt to reclaim some control over the chaos. I found an online community of women experiencing family estrangement, reading posts that mirrored my experience so closely it was almost unnerving. A memory of my former therapist's words came unbidden. "You're not wrong for asking for love in return." The message gave me a quiet, simmering strength. While scrolling, I found a listing for a part-time office assistant and, sitting at the library computer, typed a carefully considered application, my fingers trembling slightly but my resolve firm. The final sting came in the form of a social media post by Lorna, laughing and toasting at another family dinner, the wine bottle at my empty chair a bitter reminder of how completely I had been replaced. I didn't cry. Instead, I clicked apply on 3 additional jobs, bookmarked the women's shelter link, and felt a growing sense of agency despite the relentless erosion of my support system. It was clear now that everyone in my life, not just my family, had begun to distance themselves out of convenience or discomfort, and my sister's mockery had confirmed it wasn't circumstantial. It was intentional. Still, I refused to collapse into despair. I felt fire instead of sorrow, a determination to survive and to act. Whatever lay ahead, I would meet it with eyes open, cautious but unyielding. The morning air in Pearland was sharp and unyielding, cutting through the thin fabric of my jacket as I stepped out of the car I had slept in for the second night. The women's shelter loomed ahead, its brick facade both welcoming and intimidating, full from the night before, forcing me to make do with the cold asphalt beneath my feet. I shifted, rubbing at the soreness in my back, feeling the lingering ache from nights spent in uncomfortable seats and restless sleep. Hunger gnawed quietly, a constant reminder that survival wasn't just emotional, it was physical too. Across the lot, a mother and daughter waited in line, the girl clutching a worn backpack, the mother offering a gentle smile. For a brief moment, I envied them, not for the comfort of their bond, but for the normalcy I'd never known. I pulled out my notebook again, scribbling a line that had taken form over the past few days. People think abandonment is loud, but it's usually just quiet and final. I paused, glancing into the side mirror of the car. My reflection startled me. The eyes staring back weren't familiar. The sharp edges of exhaustion, the hollow cheeks, the set jaw of someone who had been betrayed over time. If I didn't recognize myself, how could I expect my family to? That thought hung in the air, heavy as the morning mist, and I felt a simmering anger begin to stir, restrained but insistent. A memory flashed unbidden, a Thanksgiving dinner 3 years ago. Lorna, my sister, had turned to me with a smile I'd once mistaken for playful teasing. "You suck the joy out of every gathering," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The room had erupted in laughter. Even my mother's smile was thin, bordering on cruel. I had sat there, nodding, pretending the sting didn't reach deep into my chest, before retreating to my car later, cheeks wet with silent tears. That night I had deleted the family group chat in a small act of rebellion, unnoticed and unremarkable, but it had been the first crack forming in the mirror of our family. It wasn't the start of the estrangement, it was just the moment I began keeping score, quietly marking the betrayals and the laughter I wasn't a part of. By midday, I found myself ducking into the restroom of a nearby fast food place, a refuge from the unforgiving sun. A young employee glanced at me with a flicker of pity that I hadn't realized I hated so intensely until that moment. I stared into the mirror, fixing my hair and washing my face, confronting the reflection that felt both foreign and familiar. "This isn't me. This isn't who I've fought to be," I muttered under my breath, words meant for no one else. I remembered times I had bent over backward to please, to be seen, to be tolerated. I used to bend so much for people that I forgot I had a spine. I whispered to the mirror, feeling a spark of recognition ignite. For the first time, I felt the determination to reclaim not just a place in the world, but the authority over my own self-perception. I left the restroom with a plan forming, fragile but concrete. This afternoon, I would attend a free community legal aid session, seeking guidance and tools that might give me leverage over the chaos left behind by those who had deemed me unnecessary. It was the beginning of a subtle shift, a movement from survival toward strategy, from hurt toward control. The betrayals weren't sudden. They had been cultivated over years, hidden beneath jokes and traditions, teaching my family to see me as a burden rather than a loved one. Recognition of this gave me an odd clarity, one that carried both grief and the simmering ember of anger, coiled tight beneath my ribs. As I stepped out of the restroom, my phone buzzed, a blocked number flashing across the screen. My heart skipped, but not in fear. It was anticipation, the kind that signals a turning point. The moment I had closed the library door behind me days ago had been survival. Now, this was something else. A reckoning, silent but resolute, had begun. I clicked the phone with cautious intent, ready to see what lay on the other end, knowing that every choice from this moment forward mattered in the battle to reclaim myself. The morning light was thin and grey, brushing across the streets of Pearland as I shuffled toward the little diner I had claimed as a temporary refuge. My back ached from another night of restless sleep and the memory of my family's words, "You're not welcome anymore," replayed endlessly in my mind. It was a silence louder than any argument, a declaration that home had evaporated without warning. I ordered a small breakfast, paying in exact change, trying to keep my hands steady, my voice calm. From the corner of the cafe, I caught snippets of conversation from a table of strangers, whispers of gossip about someone being absent from a gathering, and it felt like the world itself was reminding me of my exclusion. I tried reaching my mother that morning. Her voicemail swallowed my call, her absence ringing louder than any reply could. I texted, fingers trembling slightly. "Can we talk? I don't want this to end like this." The reply was curt, cold. Not now. Memories of earlier promises flashed, her assurances that she would listen, that she would understand. Now hollow echoes. Pain mingled with resolve as I realized that pleading or explaining would gain me nothing. The rupture was complete. The realization settled in. I had no home to return to, not even a familiar kitchen or a familiar smile. With a heavy heart, I made my way to the family-owned bakery where some of my belongings had been left. Stepping through the door, I was met with avoidance and polite detachment. Darby, the employee who had once smiled at me with a hint of warmth, now acted as if I were invisible, a stranger wandering in. Then Letty appeared, her expression carefully neutral, lips curling into a cold smile. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said, offering assistance with a condescending tone that implied I was more a charity case than family. My chest tightened, anger simmering beneath the surface, words forming in my mind but refusing to escape. And then the blow landed. My father's voice, steady and cold, cut through the tense quiet. "You have no home left. This is final." In his hand he held documents declaring that I had relinquished any claim to family property, any right to connection. The betrayal was no longer a misunderstanding or a fleeting lapse. It was deliberate. I questioned silently but sharply. Was I ever part of this family? The weight of it pressed down, a tangible gravity that forced me to acknowledge what I had been denying. This estrangement was complete, intentional, and permanent. I walked out of the bakery without a word, my pulse racing but my mind sharp. I found a quiet spot on a nearby bench, pulling out my notebook, letting the pen scratch across the pages. I will not let them erase me. I mapped out local legal aid hours, considered what steps I could take without being reckless, without letting anger dictate my actions. The resolve was quiet but firm. I would fight, but I would fight. Smart. Their betrayal would not become my undoing. As I rose from the bench, tucking the notebook under my arm, I glanced back at the empty shop front. The silence of their rejection felt absolute, yet it ignited something new within me. I whispered under my breath, barely audible over the hum of the street. If home is where they refuse you, then I'll build a new one. The betrayal was clear, the path forward uncertain, but for the first time since being cast out, I felt a flicker of control, an ember of determination that refused to be extinguished. The morning sunlight seeped through the thin curtains of my temporary room, pale and indifferent. I stretched, feeling the residual stiffness from sleeping on a borrowed futon, and my mind immediately gravitated to the conversation that had shattered my life. Betrayal was a word that now seemed insufficient. I sat on the edge of the bed, mentally cataloguing what had been lost, my family's trust, my home, the routine safety I had taken for granted, and began plotting my next steps. Every thought had to be deliberate, every word measured. I whispered to myself, I cannot let them define me by their decisions. On the notepad beside me, I wrote down my key points. The contributions I had made, the responsibilities I had shouldered, the love I had offered without hesitation. It wasn't enough to be hurt. I needed strategy, precision, and patience. The first rule, no emotional outbursts, no giving them the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. I reached out to a trusted friend, someone who had known me longer than any of my relatives. Over coffee, I outlined the situation, absorbing their quiet encouragement and pragmatic advice. Then I visited a local community legal center, walking through the door with a measured calm, my notebook tucked under my arm. I gathered information on property rights, family obligations, and legal avenues I could take if confrontation became necessary. In the background, subtle interactions caught my attention. Extended family members passing by, eyes flicking in cautious appraisal, murmurs of judgment that barely registered to most, but seared into me. Each glance, each whispered comment confirmed that the betrayal was not merely in words, it was in every careful, coded action surrounding me. I collected small pieces of evidence, Photographs, receipts, reminders of my presence and contributions, tangible proof that I mattered. Later, I made my way to the family-owned business, a place I had once walked through casually, now bracing myself against the current of tension that filled the air. Siblings and employees alike navigated around me with pointed politeness, half smiles masking unspoken judgments. Then came the remark that crystallized everything, a subtle, condescending comment meant to undermine, spoken as casually as ordering a cup of coffee, but loaded with decades of accumulated disdain. Suppressed anger surged through me, but I kept my composure. My purpose was clear. I would assert myself, not with shouts, but with unshakable presence. I approached the parent who wielded the most authority, presenting my case with careful articulation. Each point was delivered calmly, measured, and deliberate. My contributions, my commitment, my claims not as demands but as undeniable truths. Reactions rippled across the room: surprise, dismissiveness, grudging acknowledgement. I noted their shifts in posture, the flickers of discomfort when I spoke with clarity. The first calculated move was complete. I had reclaimed a small piece of dignity, planting a seed for the larger strategy. Confidence, quiet and deliberate, began to replace the lingering hurt. I could feel the momentum rising, the tension coiling and stretching, a rope I now held the end of firmly. By the time I left the building, I had retreated to a quiet street corner to collect my thoughts. I revisited every interaction, every glance, every statement, refining the plan in my mind. I noted who had offered subtle support, who had inadvertently revealed hidden motives, and which avenues required caution. Strategy was now my armor. The city's din became background to the clarity forming inside me. I understood with a firm certainty that the next encounter would be pivotal. My determination had hardened, tempered by reflection and the controlled expression of my frustration. As evening descended, I walked slowly through the streets, tracing my steps home with a careful eye on every detail. Each movement was deliberate, each thought catalogued for the next phase. The fire within me refused to wane, flickering with a quiet promise of action. I whispered into the cooling air a vow to myself more than anyone else. I walked away, but the fire inside me wasn't quenched. I knew the next move would change everything. The betrayal had not broken me, it had sharpened me. And now, fully aware of both the stakes and the playing field, I prepared to strike with the precision of someone who had nothing left to lose but everything to reclaim. The morning sunlight seeped through the thin curtains of my temporary room, pale and indifferent. I stretched, feeling the residual stiffness from sleeping on a borrowed futon, and my mind immediately gravitated to the conversation that had shattered my life. Betrayal was a word that now seemed insufficient. I sat on the edge of the bed, mentally cataloguing what had been lost, my family's trust, my home, the routine safety I had taken for granted, and began plotting my next steps. Every thought had to be deliberate, every word measured. I whispered to myself, I cannot let them define me by their decisions. On the notepad beside me, I wrote down my key points: the contributions I had made, the responsibilities I had shouldered, the love I had offered without hesitation. It wasn't enough to be hurt. I needed strategy, precision, and patience. The first rule: no emotional outbursts, no giving them the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. I reached out to a trusted friend, someone who had known me longer than any of my relatives. Over coffee, I outlined the situation, absorbing their quiet encouragement and pragmatic advice. Then I visited a local community legal center, walking through the door with a measured calm, my notebook tucked under my arm. I gathered information on property rights, family obligations, and legal avenues I could take if confrontation became necessary. In the background, subtle interactions caught my attention. Extended family members passing by, eyes flicking in cautious appraisal, murmurs of judgment that barely registered to most, but seared into me. Each glance, each whispered comment, confirmed that the betrayal was not merely in words, it was in every careful, coded action surrounding me. I collected small pieces of evidence, photographs, receipts, reminders of my presence and contributions, tangible proof that I mattered. Later, I made my way to the family-owned business, a place I had once walked through casually, now bracing myself against the current of tension that filled the air. Siblings and employees alike navigated around me with pointed politeness, half smiles masking unspoken judgments. Then came the remark that crystallized everything, a subtle, condescending comment meant to undermine, spoken as casually as ordering a cup of coffee, but loaded with decades of accumulated disdain. Suppressed anger surged through me, but I kept my composure. My purpose was clear. I would assert myself, not with shouts, but with unshakable presence. I approached the parent who wielded the most authority, presenting my case with careful articulation. Each point was delivered calmly, measured, and deliberate. My contributions, my commitment, my claims not as demands but as undeniable truths. Reactions rippled across the room: surprise, dismissiveness, grudging acknowledgement. I noted their shifts in posture, the flickers of discomfort when I spoke with clarity. The first calculated move was complete. I had reclaimed a small piece of dignity, planting a seed for the larger strategy. Confidence, quiet and deliberate, began to replace the lingering hurt. I could feel the momentum rising, the tension coiling and stretching, a rope I now held the end of firmly. By the time I left the building, I had retreated to a quiet street corner to collect my thoughts. I revisited every interaction, every glance, every statement, refining the plan in my mind. I noted who had offered subtle support, who had inadvertently revealed hidden motives, and which avenues required caution. Strategy was now my armor. The city's din became background to the clarity forming inside me. I understood with a firm certainty that the next encounter would be pivotal. My determination had hardened, tempered by reflection and the controlled expression of my frustration. As evening descended, I walked slowly through the streets, tracing my steps home with a careful eye on every detail. Each movement was deliberate, each thought catalogued for the next phase. The fire within me refused to wane, flickering with a quiet promise of action. I whispered into the cooling air a vow to myself more than anyone else. I walked away, but the fire inside me wasn't quenched. I knew the next move would change everything. The betrayal had not broken me, it had sharpened me. And now, fully aware of both the stakes and the playing field, I prepared to strike with the precision of someone who had nothing left to lose but everything to reclaim. The morning light filtered through the blinds of my modest rented room, cutting across the stacks of notebooks and papers I'd gathered over the past week. I traced the lines I had scribbled the night before, evidence of every slight, every passive-aggressive remark, every small betrayal that had been accumulating like sediment in my mind. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I reviewed the interactions from yesterday, the tension in the family business, the cold dismissal and the grudging acknowledgements. My thoughts were precise, tactical. I whispered to myself, I will not give them the satisfaction of unraveling. Today I would test the waters, measure their reactions, and assert myself without letting anger override strategy. Calm on the surface, resolute beneath, I organized my documents, preparing for what I knew would be a delicate dance of words, presence, and perception. By mid-morning, I entered a neutral setting, a quiet coffee shop that neither side could claim as territory. Family members were already there, casually seated, masks of normalcy hiding sharpened edges beneath. Sarcasm slipped from lips in quiet, calculated phrases, the air thick with microaggressions that would have been invisible to any casual observer. Then, subtle but deliberate, came the provocation. A comment, light in tone but heavy in implication, meant to unsettle me, to remind me of my supposed place outside their approval. My stomach tightened, frustration coursed through my veins, Yet I maintained an even expression, focusing on the plan I had rehearsed. Every reaction I held in check, every step deliberate, as the momentum built toward the confrontation I had been preparing for. I responded with measured composure, articulate, concise. I presented the facts of my contributions, the invisible labor, the acts of care that had once gone unnoticed. Each word was a calculated counterpoint to the misinformation subtly woven into their narrative. I introduced small pieces of evidence, a receipt here, a photograph there, reminders of responsibilities undertaken quietly, diligently. Eyes shifted uncomfortably, smiles faltered, dismissive gestures hesitated. The first real pushback had succeeded. The family, for a brief moment, had to reconsider their stance. Satisfaction rose, mixed with lingering anger and caution. I allowed myself a brief inward nod, but did not linger on victory. The game was far from over. After leaving the coffee shop, I sought refuge in a quiet corner of the city park, notebook in hand, retracing each moment. Reflections swirled, subtle alliances, potential vulnerabilities, and the ethical lines I would not cross even in the pursuit of justice. I consulted a trusted mentor by phone, absorbing guidance that reinforced both strategy and composure. Legal, financial, social avenues were weighed, analyzed, and folded into a plan that felt solid yet flexible. Confidence swelled, tempered by awareness of the risks ahead, the potential for backlash if any move was mishandled. The fire within me burned steady, controlled, determined. As evening approached, I organized the evidence collected throughout the day, mapping out points to address in upcoming encounters, timing, location, audience, all carefully considered to maximize impact. Contingencies were drafted, the unpredictable moves of family accounted for in advance. Every interaction, every response was prepared with precision. The determination peaked. I felt the quiet thrill of readiness, a sense of anticipation sharpening my senses. I walked through the streets, each step deliberate, retracing my route home while mentally rehearsing dialogues and outcomes. Nothing had been left to chance. By the time I reached my room, I had a full picture of the confrontation to come. Every document, every conversation point, every piece of evidence was in place. The tension had escalated, but it was contained, harnessed. I understood now that the true measure of control lay not in retaliation, but in strategic, deliberate assertion. I whispered to myself as night fell, a vow more than a thought. Everything is in place, but the real test will come tonight, when words will either heal or wound irreparably. My mind was sharp, my resolve unwavering. The family believed they could intimidate me, but they had underestimated the quiet, steady force I had become. The room was heavy with expectation, every corner filled with whispered speculation and subtle glances, and I felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that comes with walking into a battlefield, disguised as a family gathering. I checked my notes one last time, ensuring that every piece of evidence was in order, every ally subtly positioned, every moment of timing precise. The documents, screenshots, and carefully documented exchanges were ready, proof of long-concealed wrongdoing that would leave no room for denial. Anxiety flickered for an instant, but it was quickly replaced by focused determination. I had spent days plotting, rehearsing, calculating. Tonight, the truth would finally be undeniable. As the family assembled around the formal dinner table, I observed C3, the instigator, with a keen eye. Her confident smile, now tempered by subtle unease, betrayed the smallest hint of awareness that the balance was shifting. Unexpectedly, a cousin, previously neutral, subtly nodded toward me, a quiet signal of support. My awareness sharpened, anger simmering beneath a controlled exterior. Every movement, every word I had prepared was poised to meet its mark. Tension rose steadily as I positioned myself for the first reveal. I began introducing evidence with deliberate subtlety, weaving in facts and observations that dismantled the antagonist's narrative piece by piece. Whispers spread across the table, expressions flickered with recognition and shock. Each reaction fueled my clarity, my resolve. Then came the undeniable moment. C3 confronted with proof that could not be dismissed or manipulated. The satisfaction was immediate, mingled with a surge of adrenaline that sharpened my focus. Momentum had peaked, and the conflict flared fully into the open, rapid, and unrelenting. The antagonist attempted to regain control, launching verbal retorts and emotional barbs intended to destabilize me. I maintained composure, deflecting with calm, strategic precision, redirecting attention to the facts themselves. The room became a flurry of verbal and psychological exchanges, each counterpoint reinforcing my position, each assertion quietly undermining their authority. My pulse raced, yet every word, every pause was calculated, sustaining control amidst chaos. Allies, previously watching from the sidelines, began to step in, validating my claims and reinforcing credibility. Family members shifted subtly, their allegiance quietly realigning as the weight of evidence became undeniable. A sense of vindication began to rise within me, tempered by the awareness of lingering emotional fractures. Authority, once assumed unquestionable by the antagonist, wavered and faltered as I asserted my role and clarified my contributions. The truth had been exposed. The balance of influence had shifted decisively. By the time the gathering concluded, the antagonist was visibly shaken, their dominance fractured. I left the room with the quiet satisfaction of vindication and the knowledge that my voice had been heard and acknowledged. Relief settled over me, tempered by the awareness that trust and healing would not come easily, and that navigating the fallout would require the same precision I had applied to the confrontation itself. As I stepped into the cool evening, I felt both the weight and the power of what had been accomplished. With the truth finally out, I realized the final test was yet to come, handling the fallout with dignity. The morning sunlight felt different that day, warmer and less accusing, as if the world itself acknowledged the battles fought and the truths revealed. I walked through the quiet streets reflecting on the confrontation, the shock still lingering in some faces, the subtle nods of acknowledgement from others. The antagonist faced consequences that were both public and deeply personal, a reckoning that rippled through social circles, and though it didn't erase the pain, it underscored a vital reality. Accountability, at last, had arrived. I felt a mix of satisfaction and solemn reflection, aware that vindication carried its own weight. I had played my part fully, asserting my presence, claiming my voice, and setting a boundary that could not be ignored. In the days that followed, I focused on rebuilding my own strength. Reclaiming autonomy meant more than financial or social independence. It was about reinforcing my own sense of worth, cultivating resilience, and applying the lessons I had painstakingly learned. Friends long overlooked or left unspoken became touchstones. Resources once taken for granted were approached with careful planning and intention. Every small action, from organizing my workspace to reconnecting with allies, felt like placing a brick in the foundation of a new life. Empowerment grew quietly, a steady pulse beneath the surface, tempered with cautious optimism. I realized I could move forward, not as a reaction to past wounds, but as an architect of my own future. Healing relationships became a delicate practice. Conversations with supportive family members or allies opened doors for understanding, empathy, and measured reconciliation. I navigated each dialogue with awareness, honoring my boundaries while acknowledging past hurts. The emotional wounds didn't vanish, nor did I pretend they could, but each interaction built clarity and emotional intelligence. The subtle tensions began to soften, revealing that even fractured bonds could hold potential for connection without sacrificing self-respect. There was a quiet maturity in acknowledging what could be mended and what must remain separate, and I held both with a balanced heart. As the weeks unfolded, I envisioned a future defined by hope and new aspirations. The horizon of possibility felt tangible, Opportunities were no longer dictated by fear or limitation. Every goal I set, every plan I drafted, carried the assurance that it was chosen by me, for me, and not dictated by the judgments of those who had once sought to diminish my value. A symbolic act, a small, deliberate step toward independence, marked the turning point, signaling not just survival, but a deliberate, empowered choice to thrive. It was a new beginning, rooted in awareness, strategy, and self-determined action. In the final moments of reflection, I understood the depth of what had been accomplished. Family dynamics had been confronted, truth had been asserted, and personal agency reclaimed. The journey had been harrowing, but in every choice and every stand taken, I had demonstrated that dignity could survive betrayal and that clarity could triumph over confusion. As I looked ahead, the past remained a lesson, not a prison, and for the first time in years, I felt the quiet confidence of a life fully my own. Even though the past could not be changed, I held the power to shape every moment ahead with clarity and strength. The path was mine, and I walked it unafraid.